Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I am your host, Matt Belair, and today's guest has a degree in kinesiology as her love for movement started at a young age as an athlete playing soccer and running cross country. In her early 20s, while recovering from an ACL tear, she discovered yoga, pranayama, and meditation. During this healing time, she was also working as an exercise physiologist for fire and police departments across 25 cities. Combining her love of movement, experience as a physiologist, and her research in the science of breath, she healed herself and many others. As a result of her experience over the last 10 years, she has developed primal coding, a methodology for understanding the language of the central nervous system through breath and movement, enabling transformation of the body and mind. She works with clients helping create daily coding and specific strength and mobility programs, which include breath work and meditation. Welcome to the show, Kristina Macias. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah. Macias, okay.
It did feel right. It did feel right.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Yay.
Yeah, of course. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah. Me too.
Well, we met because of the Oregon Eclipse, and there were so many amazing workshops. There was amazing teachers there, and I saw your class on breath, and I was lucky to catch the whole thing, and I thought it was very well done, extremely informative. I learned a lot,
Thank you.
and I also have an interest in strength and peak performance and breath and mindfulness and all that kind of stuff, and you tied it in very, very well. So I'm super excited to see you again and share your wisdom with everybody else.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you for having me. I love all things strength and breath and movement and living up to my fullest potential. I think that we all have that capability. So I'm here to distill all the information down to its simplest form so it can be understood across all peoples, right? So
Yeah,
not just
totally.
one religion or one way. So
exactly, yeah, and that's what I noticed in your workshop. You're really combining schools of thought in a really congruent and easy to understand and apply way. So for the people who are just learning about you, and myself included, I learned a little bit at the Eclipse. Can you talk a little bit about your background and then how you got into this to developing primal coding, which the name of it is so great. I love it.
Thank you. So, excuse me. I started off with my undergrad degree in exercise science. Well, actually, I guess we can go even further back with that ACL, and and because this is a huge part of my life, and I think that people need to change their philosophy and idea of what an injury is, because injuries are huge lessons. And again, going back to the language of the nervous system, which we'll continue to come back to, and how our body speaks to us. And we need to start to have this understanding of our body speaks to us in pain, in pleasure, in tingling, in coughing, in all of these things are the language of the nervous system. And so when I was 13, I had my ACL partially torn. I was playing soccer. I was very tiny. I was like maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. Had no fear and went up to this girl who had like maybe 40 pounds on me, and her knee won. And I tore my ACL, and I remember sitting there in the physical therapy office in the little adduction machine, little inner thigh machine. I remember this moment very clearly, thinking like, wow, I want to help athletes. This seems fun. Just like that simple little thought of like, this seems like a cool thing to do. And, that led to me taking anatomy physiology. That led me to going into college, I think which is very rare, knowing what I wanted to study, not knowing what I wanted to do with it, but just kind of saying, hey, wow, this is really interesting. And then I graduated my undergrad, and for my internship, I did two actually in college. I did a 300-hour internship at a sports training center. So that's where I learned a lot of my strength training, agility, plyo, speed, all of the things, speed training. And that was I'll say this, it's changing, but being a woman in the world of strength conditioning is definitely a journey, being told not to do things because you don't want to do that. You don't want to get your CSCS. You don't want to do all this. No. I'm like, well, why? Why not? And so that motivated me even more to do all the things. But I also got an internship with the fire and police officers. as a physiologist. So I did exercise testing for LA, Orange County, San Diego County. And when I graduated college, I didn't get the job because you had to be in a master's program or have 3 years experience. So I knew in that moment that I didn't want to be in a master's program because I wanted to make money. Excuse me. Post-burn cough, guys. Sorry. I knew that I wanted experience, and I became a personal trainer, and I was so grateful to have some really amazing teachers in my little small 24-hour fitness in Irvine, California. You know, my manager worked in the Air Force and had worked with Charles Poliquin, had done worked with all these and Pavel, and like had all of these really amazing certifications, and that's where I learned Westside Barbell programs and like really what.
Are you talking about Pavel Tatsulin?
Yeah.
Is that yeah? So yeah, some people wouldn't know who he is. Pavel Tatsulin is absolute badass. Yeah, sorry, keep going.
You know, no, that's okay. Sorry, sometimes I assume. Just really amazing teachers, right? And 3 years later, I got the job as a physiologist. I interviewed again, and so I started working with these firemen. And, you know, I started to notice some commonalities because at that same time that I started working with the firemen, all of a sudden my ACL gave out finally. I didn't have a surgery when I was 13. I didn't mention that. So it was partially torn that whole time. And when I fully tore it, I had to have the surgery and I couldn't strength train anymore. And that was like, oh my God, I can't deadlift. I was such a little meathead. I can't lift. Oh my God, what am I going to do with my, what am I going to do? So I started reading I was so curious about meditation and yoga. And I remember my first yoga class being like, oh my gosh, this shit keeps calling things yummy. Now I'm just hungry. Like, this is boring. My toes are numb. Like, God, what is this, you know? And, but I started to read more about it. And then in that same time, I applied to grad school at Cal. I went to Cal State Fullerton, and I was the last spring admission of like 2012 or something like that. And having those 3 things in my life, the recovery myself, working with the firemen, and then having this schooling, right? It allowed me to have so many different viewpoints. And so I started to notice that these firemen, all of them with this pain or sleeping problems or all of these issues, like they all seem to have a reverse breathing pattern or they don't have the ability currently or anymore, because we all had the ability at one point to breathe into their belly, to breathe into the deepest part of their belly. And so that's where it started. It's just a simple aspect of like, how do I teach people to breathe into their belly? Like what, without it being yoga, because now I'm lecturing to, you know, these old school men and women who are like, I say yoga and they like completely just, they blank out. I remember what happens to me is like when I research information enough, and when my reality, I guess, tells me that like it's time to share it, I'll be asked to teach it. So my boss gives me a call and she goes, "Hey, can you teach yoga to San Marcos Fire?" I'm like, "Sure." Side note, like I don't necessarily have my yoga certification, but I knew enough to teach. And I was like, "Cool, I get the opportunity to teach breath." I'm like, "Yes." So she told me I had to like talk for 30 minutes before. I'm like, okay. So I created this little like worksheet and like, or like a little lecture, I guess. And I got all 16, I remember this moment, 16 firemen to do Breath of Fire all in sync at the same time. And like they opened their eyes and like, I think it scared them a little bit because they were like, whoa, what just happened? And it was my first experience teaching this. But then after that lecture, I get a call from my boss, and she goes, "Hey, I got an email saying you talked about breath a little bit too much, and so next time could you, it was just like that first, like, okay, all right, so how do I form this?" And it was such a beautiful progression because each time that I taught it, I was able to take 20 words and move it into 5 words and really be able to drive home the idea of like, hey, do you guys want to sleep and do you guys want to be in pain? This is not yoga. This is like how your body works. So I created a lecture called Breath Control is Stress Control. Super cheesy. And so my boss allowed me and like signed me up, and I went around to cities, and I went from Santa Monica, San Marcos, Pasadena, all those places, and was able to really teach these men how to sleep, how to not be in pain. And then I'd come back years later or a year or two later, and it's interesting because they'd be like, hey, so I remember you taught that breath class. It's like they didn't want anybody to know. Like, hey, so I tried it, and I think you're onto something. It kind of worked. It's like, yeah, thank you. So, they were my biggest teachers because, they needed it the most. And I had this job of really simplifying and distilling this information down for them. So within those first 2 minutes of the lecture, can I get them to understand what I'm really trying to teach them, which is just, hey, how to control your shit, and it not be yoga. And that's where it really started to, again, distill down the information and make it palatable for everyone. Yeah, and then so now I'm here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, you have more.
No. So I mean,
Awesome.
I could talk for a long time.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what you're here for. I definitely want to talk about some of the breath techniques because, from my experience being a martial artist, breath was always important and it was always in my life. But it wasn't in the other sports that I practiced. So skateboarding, definitely not. People weren't doing that. But hockey and baseball and soccer, I was taking in these concepts from martial arts that people were unfamiliar with that are super important. And breath, it links to everything. I posted something a little while ago, how you can basically activate DMT through breath and experience a higher level or a different level, or however you want to frame it, of consciousness through breathing. It's really fascinating and interesting what can happen through breathing, and it's so fundamental, as connects to the central nervous system, which is what you talk about. And so you've kind of coded it so it's palatable, with what you're saying about yoga. That's kind of how my friends or some fans are with the podcast. They're like these secret listeners, they're just like, I don't want everybody to know that I'm listening to these crazy ideas, but they won't click the like, but then they'll send me a private message or something. But before we get into that, because I want to definitely talk about the strategy, like some techniques for breath and what you talk about in your lectures. But I just wanted to touch on the eclipse for a moment because, we were both there, and people from around the world attended that. I don't know if you've been to a festival before, but the eclipse experience itself was so transformative. I met such amazing people, and we had speakers and healers and experts in yoga, meditation, spirituality, consciousness come from all over the world. And we had native elders holding sacred space at these fires. And, I just wanted to see if you had one story or two stories that stood out for you, because for me, when I was there, I was doing workshops and healing as well, and just sharing what I knew and what I had to offer to the community. We had an ascension lounge there with future technologies and things like that. But, the amount of stories that came from that event of people really transforming themselves. And for me, what it gave an opportunity for any transformational festival anyway, is an opportunity to assess your life. Are you happy or are you not happy? If you are not happy, if you are not stoked about after you leave this space and your life is terrible and you hate everything, what would you enjoy in life? What do you want? And then, how do you want to move forward with that? And so that's kind of like the fundamental conversations, but the space and the healers and the teachers really open up a really honest talk about that. And then you also went to Burning Man after, which I also went to Burning Man after. And this year was a lot of service as well, bringing in for me, it's those same fundamental questions. And then how do we code or design our life so that it is harmonious once we leave these really high level spaces? So I just wanted to touch on that and see if you had any really profound experiences or stories come from that event.
Well, I've been going to festivals for 7 years now, and, each year my purpose and intention changes, obviously. when I'm 22, 23, you're there to kind of hang out and party and like do the thing. And you're like, okay, it's kind of overwhelming. Just like anything you do at first, with repetition, things become more clear, right? With anything that you learn, right? And you start to see the reflections of self within that experience. And for me, I can tell you, festivals, I love my life outside of festivals. Like I want to go home after a festival. And that was always an interesting concept to me of like, when we went to festivals, people are like, I don't ever want to leave. Like, this is the best. And people need to realize that how to take that experience, how to take all of those huge reflections of self and apply them again into your everyday life. And for the symbiosis, for me, it was overall a beautiful experience of the family that I've created over the past 7 years. All the people that I have met through all the festivals were there, and you're like, wow, I'm definitely more of a lone wolf type person. Like just my whole life, I can entertain myself very well. Like, when I'm at festivals, like group dynamic, we all know, if you've been to a festival, it's like, okay, I have to pee. And everybody's like, oh, damn it. Like, there's like 10 of you and you're like trying to keep everybody together. And you're like, and then Kristina, you see me and I'm like, all right, gotta go. Bye. Like, but it was really this like beautiful experience of like, I really want to be part of this group. I'm holding a sign. Like my friend had this, like one of those like lasers or like what do you call them? Lightsabers. That
Yeah,
was
the
me holding
sabers.
light.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
anything glowy
So
or
you're like,
wandy is good.
yeah, you're like, this is our group. Yeah. And it was this beautiful experience of like, I really want to just like run off by myself right now, but I love all of these people are just so awesome. And like, wow, how did I get so many friends that do so many amazing things? And that was my overall experience of just so much gratitude for all of the past experiences being kind of brought to a point during this eclipse. And I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of one like necessarily like magical experience. Like, I mean, I can think of many in my life, but I think for the eclipse, it was really just so much gratitude for the accumulation of all of these amazing things leading to that point. And I've taught a couple workshops, and I do Reiki and quantum touch as well. I don't know if have you heard of quantum touch?
I have heard of quantum touch. I don't know
Yeah.
if I met like the originator of it. I forget his name in LA. Maybe
Gordon,
if you're in LA. Yeah,
Richard
yeah, yeah,
Gordon or
yeah,
something.
yeah, Richard Gordon. Yes, I have met him. And yes, yes, yeah, I know him. That's amazing.
That's magic. Yeah. And I can talk about that too. And I've actually used quantum touch on the firemen. To a side note, I would love to talk about those
Yeah,
experiences
yeah,
too.
of course. We'll talk about it.
But
Yeah, and I just wanted to I wanted to just talk about like your experience interesting like at the festival. I love your answer because I find that they're mirrors for where you are in life. So a lot of the times when I'm at the burn or at a festival, people will be, talking about how they expected the burn to be one way, but they're getting a different result. And it's because of their unconscious mind. And
their
I was like, are you
expectations.
continuously their expectations? So I was doing the God phone at Burning Man, and not a lot of people know that like the phone is there, but you can actually be God. And so you pick it's ridiculous, right? You go to the God phone and you get to talk to God, right? But there's got to be someone on the other side.
Yeah.
So they had showed me where it was. So I was being God, and I ended up getting
Ooh,
stuck on
cool.
the phone for like an hour, and it was really great. But this girl, so as I'm going through and just like offering love and compassion and just being God on the other side, and it was funny because people would talk to you as if it seemed like they thought you were God. You know what I mean? Like it really, like thank you,
Well, you
God, and stuff
are.
like this.
We all are.
Yeah,
We know this.
totally. So one woman, younger lady, she was actually had a really tough time, and so we were talking. I was like, hey, like I'm an actual human. I know you know that. Like I'm just over here. Like let's talk about this. So
Mm.
I go out, and basically what had been happening was she was a beautiful younger woman, and people were like catcalling and being kind of like just douches. You know what I mean? And she's like, I expected Burning Man to be different. I didn't expect people to be
Mm.
catcalling and hollering at me. And I was like, and I deduced pretty quickly that this is something that happens in her life. And I was like, are you
Mm.
continuously thinking this? And she's like, yeah. So we basically did a really quick reset. I was like, you have to stop thinking that in the back of your mind every second, because the energy here and what Burning Man does is it will give you that mirror back really quick.
Mhm.
And so she ended up writing me after Burning Man, after we'd gone through this process, and she said, you saved my burn. That stopped happening because we switched the way we were thinking. And at the eclipse, for me, you know, when there was that center point, when the eclipse was going to happen, just the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen. I noticed walking through the crowd, there was a moment where you're going to come and you would have to like have this moment of darkness. You know what I mean? This moment of like self-reflection, no matter how perfect you could make your psychedelic experience or your friend experience, but you would have to have this forced moment of internal reflection. So you could really see the people that were balanced and holding space and the people that, you know, were a little bit nervous to go inside. So, you know, I think that people like you are what really make those events special, because you're holding space and having conversations that are open and honest with where people are. So I just wanted to share that. I'm gonna stop rambling because I want to talk about, if you want to go into quantum touch, let's do that, or into breath, whatever you want to hit first.
So I can kind of link it all together. So, you know, with the firemen too, it's how do I show them magic is real without scaring them too much? And if people, I mean, a lot of people don't know what quantum touch is, or even people I've noticed as I've done Reiki at festivals, I kind of assume, and again, assumption people and expectation just can lead to disappointment. Let's just keep that in mind. And you know, I kind of assume that people know what these things are. And, you know, I stopped kind of doing Reiki at festivals because I was tired of convincing people. And this is the same thing with the firemen, you know, it's like, I can only do so much convincing, you know? And with quantum touch, I utilize, and so this is like a most advanced form of breath work, right? It's the most subtle form. And I would love to also talk about subtle versus peak experience and spectrums and principles. Oh, I love them. But quantum touch, I can use breath to shift bones. And so people are like, huh, what? And so with Reiki, the energy comes, and this is through imagination, right? And because imagination is very real. And in my imagination, the Reiki comes from my head, and Reiki has its own intelligence. And like, if I place my hand on your shoulder, it could go to your lungs or your hip. Like it is its own intelligence. Whereas quantum touch is more of me controlling the energy and pulling it into my feet. So I imagine I inhale up my arm, up into my head, and I exhale into my hands. And so you can even practice this. People can just, if they want to sit there and spend 5 minutes without getting bored and without the self-talk of, what is this? This is stupid. This is, you know, whatever this is, just for a moment, amuse me, right? Inhaling through the feet, up into the top of the head, exhale into the hands. And so there's different breathing patterns. I can do breath of fire. I can inhale for 4, exhale for 4, whatever I feel. And because of my background and understanding just body and structure and muscles and being able to visualize them, I would go to the firemen and I'd be like, hey, and they know me by now. I'm like weird kind of hippie one. And they, you know, and I'm like, you guys want to see some magic? And then they're like, kind of roll their eyes. They're like, yeah, okay, go ahead. And they amuse me. And so the easiest way is I put my hands on the top of their hip bones, right? And so I'll like, hey, come behind. And so I'll put my hands on their hip bones, and they'll be like this. One of the firemen that I worked with was literally like this. He woke up, he couldn't even sit up out of bed. He'd have to like roll out of bed. And he was like 42. I mean, he was really young, great shape. He looked like he had, you know, had muscle and this and that, but the man was, you know, very hurt, you know? And so I would take my breath, I'd do it a few times. And then within that, I would have them do some like contract and relax. So they're doing work too. I would have them breathe into their belly. I would have them contract and relax. And we'll talk about tension or attention in a second too. And I would balance their hips back into place. And the one who's experiencing the balancing, sometimes they would look at me and they're like, I was going to call bullshit, but my whole right side is tingling. They're like, what just happened? And then the other guys would be like, wait, his hips are balanced now. What, how did you do that? What did you do? You know, and they didn't want to believe it, but I'm like, I don't know, magic. But I make sure that when I do balance people's hips, I tell them like, hey, this is going to go back to where it was, because the way your bone structures were based off of your all of your experiences and all of your patterns, all of your daily patterns. So if you don't change these subtle aspects of yourself or your life or your movement, it will go back into place. But for a moment, allow me to show you what it feels like to be balanced. And let's take a moment to be like, hey, what does this feel like? And for the man who was so shifted, it took him a second. I finished and like I balanced, and we were kind of talking afterwards, and he just looks at me, he goes, he looks at me, he's like, will you marry me? I was like, no. He's like, no, but really, I feel like I'm standing like this. He felt like he was standing sideways because for so long his hips were sideways. And, you know, he was like, well, can you just do that each time you come in? He's like, I don't even know what you did, but like, please, you know? And so over time, I would just do it over and over again, but also teach him the breathing patterns that we'll go over, to showing him, hey, this is how you do it. Because just because I can do it, if I can do it, that means you can do it. And I think, you know, I give my clients that confidence, or this is what I do for my clients. I want to give them that confidence to say, hey, yeah, I have these magic hands and I can do these things, but so can you. Like, I'm just a reflection of you. I'm showing you the potential that you have, you know? And yeah, quantum touch.
Yeah. Well, you're opening up the possibility, you know, like even for me when I'm teaching sports psychology or something to an athlete, to go through the process of just convincing them that visualization works, you know. So you're opening a doorway of what's possible, because it's interesting that so many people I find are really excited to tell you about what their limits are. You know, like I posted a video or something on YouTube or something. They're like, oh, you know, like this and this, you know, should be some sort of smack talk about, you know, how that's not possible. But they're always really excited to tell you about what's possible. And I was like, your limits are not my limits. And for me, I'd like to see, you know, like what is possible. You know, I'd like to experience it first, and then reflect if it's possible or not possible, you know, like quantum touch or Reiki or visualization or meditation or lucid dreaming or astral project, whatever the case is. If somebody is looking me in the face and telling me they can do it, and they seem honest enough, I'm like, all right, like let's give this a try.
Yep.
And so if we can open up to that concept. So you do have a lot of techniques and processes. Do you want to move into like, well, you're like kind of a wealth of knowledge. Do you want to go into some of the strategies you use, or a little bit more theory? I'll let you kind of decide where we go.
I mean, either. We can start with theory and go into the physical. It's up to you. Where do you want to? Because so many ways in. There's so many ways in.
What I love is like, to hear a little bit about the theory, but like also for people listening, you know, what would you want to give for them? So if like, okay, this is exciting, I want to give it a try. Maybe some of the processes that you walk some of your clients through, or the police and firefighters, because I know in working with them, you've seen transformation. It's like a lot of stuff like, this isn't real. Then they do it, and then like, what the heck just happened? So for people to be able to have like a takeaway and some processes. And also I took notes at your workshop, and so more I did.
Awesome. So I think the first, if I were to distill breath down to its simplest form, and I talked about this in my workshop, is, and I want people to understand what I'm doing is teaching principles. So anything that I teach can be applied to all things, because that's what a principle is. And so when people experience what I teach, they're kind of like, hey, that sounds like this, or hey, that sounds like that. I'm like, cool, good, I'm doing it right. You know, it should look like some things that you've experienced, because that's what distilling something down to a principle is. And so what I found the principle breathing pattern is, that can be applied to all things and manipulated, right, is just the box breath, the four corners, I should say, of the breath. So we have the inhale, the hold, the exhale, and the hold. And all of these sides of the breath have such beautiful, will show you so many aspects of yourself. And so people also need to remember that anything that I experience within myself is also physically is a mental equivalent within, right? So I noticed, so we'll talk about this. So the inhale, my inhale can increase my heart rate. It teaches me how to expand and stretch out my lungs and my torso. I use my inhale for energy, right? And when I hold my breath, and a lot of people, I think breath holds are becoming more popular with a Wim Hof type breath or a breathing pattern, which we can totally talk about. I would like to talk about that actually. Um, so in the holds, so am I comfortable in holds? Am I inhaling and then am I tensing in my hold? Because if I tense in my hold, that can increase my heart rate. But if I stay really calm in my hold, that could actually decrease my heart rate, right? So how can we play and utilize these aspects of breath and get comfortable in all of these areas? Because, I recently I was in Maine visiting a friend and I went surfing, and it's like, sometimes you get up and you're like, then a wave comes and you're on the end of your exhale and then you're like, shit, I have no air. Are you comfortable at the bottom of the hold? Also, the holds will help increase my CO2, right? So CO2, and people have I feel like they give CO2 such a bad rap, but if we didn't have CO2, we wouldn't be able to bring oxygen to the muscles and the tissues. So that's a whole other thing. And all the methods that I talk about kind of highlight each of these aspects. So if I were to think about like, free diving and those kind of breathing patterns, they really focus on that inhale and packing in the air and really expanding, right? And the holds, breath holds are seen in like the Russian breath method, Buteyko method. So a lot of people may be familiar, or athletes may be familiar with oxygen advantage. I'm not sure if you're, and that's the thing. There's so many different ways that people have translated this. It's like, how are people supposed to have time to research all of these things, right? And so that's kind of, again, what I've attempted or am doing. And so the holds, and then I have the exhale. Our exhales are so important. Our exhales, I'm like, exhale. When I lengthen my exhale, right, I can decrease my heart rate. And then you have what's called the polyvagal theory. And so right now, I think we have this huge saturation point of like, if I look at all the TED Talks about breath, they all kind of say the same thing, which is beautiful because we have this saturation point of sympathetic and parasympathetic, and it's a very simple concepts, right? But how do we bring this down to a deeper level? So my exhales can immediately put a brake to my sympathetic system. So if you think about trauma therapy, like Peter Levine, are you familiar with Peter Levine? He works with somatic. So he's like kind of a somatic experiencing he works with people with PTSD. And I remember watching this video one time of him speaking to his soldier, and the soldier they told him that he had Tourette's because he would just do this all the time, right? He had this thing. Well, he was in the war, a bomb went off, and you know what he did? This to protect himself, and then he got scared because there's people around him, so his mind was stuck in the pattern. It wasn't Tourette's, it was a trauma. It's severely stuck into his nervous system. So when you don't feel safe, safety is actually a true state of the nervous system. When I don't feel safe, I won't be able to look people in the eye, right? So the guy's sitting up there and he's kind of like not really looking him in the eye. When we don't feel safe, we don't have access to these beautiful facial features that make people feel safe. When you meet somebody and you're like, wow, like you see it in their eyes and they just like, they make you like melt. You're like, oh, okay, I'm home. Well, we can access this safety through our exhale. And so what he had him do was hum, and he had just lengthen his exhale, and the humming will build some compression, right? So we feel the abs and everything kind of press in, and we actually get some really beautiful compression of the lungs so that we can inhale very naturally. But that's a whole other thing I'll get to. We're not even at the bottom of the box yet. But when I exhale and I hum, and he had him do this and just like kind of drop his jaw and like and do like a mastication, so like a chewing type action, which is also connected to our safety or our vagus nerve, which is what I'm talking about, just accessing our vagus nerve, which is the nerve of safety. And within like a couple minutes, you could see the change in his face. And people need to realize that these sounds, like humming or lengthening the exhales, this is the language of the nervous system. Let's take away yoga. Okay, let's take away yoga. Where did yoga get its stuff from? Where's that body of knowledge where yoga got it all from, you know? And so lengthening my exhales through humming, lengthening my exhales through hissing is what I usually have people do at first, because people are more comfortable breathing out their mouth than they are necessarily in and out through their nose. And that has to do with breathing volume, which we can, oh my God, so many things to talk about. And also my exhale allows me to feel proper core compression, which I think you would understand as a martial artist. And I think it's beautiful when I meet men and women who've intrinsically, and just without even realizing it, learned all of these things. Like a friend of mine who I visited in Maine, he was just like, what do you mean people can't breathe? What do you mean people can't do those things? Like, I don't get it. He's always been able to do that. I'm like, honey, no, you learned just through your experience. And most people haven't. So when I work with clients, a lot of them have no idea how to compress their core properly. And they wonder, and then I realize this, you know, if you can't even breathe into the belly or the space below your belly button, like where's your root? Where are you in your max push pressing, or you're deadlifting? I mean, like, whoa. And you can't even compress your core. Like, what is that? Where's your intra-abdominal pressure? Where is your intrathoracic pressure? Let's get into some strength conditioning here. Like, why do you think your back went out? Why do you think, you know, you have this, like you have pain along your spine? Why do you think your shoulder went out? Because my limbs are rooted within not only like my hips, but within my whole spine. So again, that's just the exhale. But teaching, I think the biggest thing is teaching people the subtle feeling of what it is to compress their core. So I invite an exercise would be like if I lay face down on the ground and put my head on my hands, and I just slowly exhale and hiss out my teeth. So I squeeze out all the air, which in my mind I think I can squeeze out. When I do that, is my belly button pressing into the ground, or is my belly button actually compressing away from the ground? Or is my belly button being sucked up? Because a lot of the times in yoga, they're like, okay, suck in your belly, or, so, you know, people are sucking in as opposed to compressing in. And that art of compression also is really beautiful and healthy for our organs. I've like literally laid people on the ground and worked and used my hands to work compression, and they're like, I think you just like moved all of my organs. I'm like, yeah, I did, back into place. And so all of these things are called blind spots, right? And these are blind spots not only of our physical body, but in our mind, aspects to self. And this is where I teach people a practice of exploration, because and when we talk about self-talk, when you start to get people to do things that they can't do, they immediately go, oh my God, I can't do it. Like, oh, like, why can't I do it? I'm like, okay, cool. Like, remember, this is your current pattern. The body you have now is an accumulation of all your past experience. But the things you practice now allow your body to change over time into the future and say, oh, okay, we need to start imagining what our potential could be, not where our current patterns are that led us to this point, right? So bottom of the box. So then we have holding out the exhale. And what I've noticed is when people will inhale, hold, exhale, and try to hold their breath out, people who have anxiety and people who are have maybe even like some type of depression or just any, I'm trying to think of another thing. Anyways, I can't think of anything. Let's just say anxiety. They have a really hard time holding out their exhale. And a lot of people's transitions from their exhale to their inhale are like, they'll exhale everything out, and then they'll, I'm sure you've seen this all the time, instead of exhaling everything out, compressing everything out, holding, because a lot of people, when they press everything out, they don't actually keep the abs engaged. And when I slowly inhale, because my exhale is connected to my core, my exhale is truly connected to its purpose, which is, activating my core, then my inhale is so beautiful. It's so natural. It's like, it just happens. So when I take care of the exhale, the inhale takes care of itself. And so I tell people, and I actually work with entrepreneurs as well. Cross Campus is this like entrepreneurial workspace, like this group workspace that I go to for the past 2 years, like a couple times a month. And I tell them, okay, can you be comfortable with nothing. I have no air. I can hold my air out for what, 10, 20 seconds. And then when I inhale, it's like there's nothing happening in my face. It's not like I'm not gasping for something. And I think that's such a beautiful transition in my life to know, as an entrepreneur, my income, somebody asked me the other day, they're like, okay, well, do you get income every 2 weeks, or is it monthly, or is it, I'm like, I get it whenever my clients pay me. I was like, what is that? I don't know. It's kind of consistent. But I mean, for me, I love, the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, because it's such a reflection of my efforts and my thing, and all of that. But rounding about, box breath. So, I mean, look at it. I just talked about the 4 corners of the breath for how many seconds? I mean, or how many minutes? Like there's so much to it. But I think a lot of people, when they first start teaching breath, they try to get people to breathe into their belly or do the things they can't do first. And I think that the most important thing is saying, hey, can you just inhale, hold, exhale, hold for a small amount of time? Like, just practice that, because anybody can do that. And get comfortable and say hello to the 4 corners. And then we can learn to manipulate them. Inhaling for 10, hold for 5, exhale 10, hold, like there's so many different ratios that I'm sure you're familiar, that people talk about. And we can expand from that. But they're all of these parts are always present in all things. Right?
Yeah. Well, man, that's amazing stuff. I was going to jump in a few times, but yeah, I usually take notes as, people are listening. No, it's wonderful, because, what I wanted to touch on was basically like, when you are born, you take your first breath, and when you die, you take your last breath. And so just to really drive home, breath is everything. Breath, there's so much, you're linking it into the mind. Of course it links to the mind. Some people will feel like that's a concept that's too far. Well, when I was training in China with 34th generation Shaolin masters, one of the masters, all of them could break something over their body, ridiculous stuff. But one of the main ones would break stone with 2 fingers, and he would break thicker pieces over his friggin' head. And breath, the difference between them. And so before that, I was training at a professional mixed martial arts camp in Thailand with professional fighters, as a sparring partner for one of the 145-pound champs. And none of these guys, which surprised the crap out of me, were applying. I was excited to train it with the professional fighters and do that kind of MMA type of stuff. Being a martial artist, I do want to know how to whoop some, be effective anyway, right? Be able to hold my own and compete, right? It's fun. I like that. But more importantly to me, I've always been, what am I capable of? How do I do these superhuman feats? Maybe I can beat up that human in a competition, great. But like, how do I master myself and do stuff that's unbelievable? And these monks could all do it. And breath and, Tai Chi and Qigong was fundamental. They couldn't have done any of those things without that. They give equal reverence and, just say reverence and importance to training the breath, training the body, being, really understanding. And you can put the breath and you can put energy into different limbs. And that's when I interviewed the master and like, how do you do this? That's unbelievable. How do you break stone with 2 fingers, which I have on video on my Instagram if anyone wants to check it out. I have a little clip on YouTube as well. He could break thicker stone over his head, which should, basically knock him out. And, he basically said it was years of practice of doing Qigong, of moving energy. And so then this is the gateway into this higher realm stuff that I think we can bridge into nicely. Like we talked about is the limiting beliefs, and people are like, oh, that's not possible. It could start as like lucid dreaming is not possible, or it's not possible for me to feel happy, or it's not possible for me to do this deadlift. It's not possible for me to, but they'll like to project that on you. It's not possible to, have
you're right. It's not.
higher...
Sorry, gotta go. You're right. Because you said it wasn't.
Right?
You're right. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So we have, with the breath though, now you can open up to literal superhuman powers, like literal superhuman powers. And so let's move into Wim Hof, where maybe you can speak about his breath pattern and how he's doing this. And, he is doing things that are quote unquote impossible. the monks that I trained with are doing things that are quote unquote impossible. And for where I am in my journey, I can touch these spaces. I can do things that people think are impossible. One of them is just lucid dreaming. It's like some people think that that's not possible. It's just like, well, I don't know. Where is your limit? What's your ceiling? Through breath, it's allowed me to access these things, and one of them is an altered state of consciousness that I have in ayahuasca, and it's like from going from a duck's consciousness to a human's consciousness. Whatever that gap is, I can activate through breathing, and the dimension is like no body, no time, no space, the ether, and I realize that I am all one. It's that Zen philosophy forever I experience directly. Even like if somebody gets into a religious debate with me in different things, and they're like, oh, this is God and that is like, I think that I've probably experienced God more than you have from this experience that I can't even put any words to. And if you would have that experience too, I think it would change your attachment to this thought of what is, because it shatters that, and it's induced through the body. You create it, which is the most beautiful and powerful thing. So that's my rant, and you can take with it what you want. But yeah, I would love for you to talk about Wim Hof and how, and if people, you can explain Wim Hof and how he's doing all these ridiculous things, but he's popularizing breath, and it's one form of many forms. So go for it.
So, okay. So let's talk about spectrums here. And I think on my notes I sent you is like subtle experience versus peak experience. And we're all stuck in this whole peak experience. I want to do the Wim Hof so that I can see God and experience these things. And then like, or just deplete all your CO2 and then increase your CO. I mean, like when you experience all those things, you're just depleting your body of CO2, people. And again, that's a great experience. And I've seen Wim Hof talk. Wim Hof is great because he's getting people to breathe. Number one, like I have nothing like Wim Hof, great. But what I tell people is like, okay, if I were to whip out my map of the stars, of all the breathing patterns and all of the aspects of self, he's one star, people. That's one thing. And people are, they just take his breath. But I mean, Wim Hof has been also in the subtle experience. And the subtle experience is the Shaolin monks, is the Qigong, which is something that I've recently gotten into in the past year. A lot of my breath it came from, or just like the intrigue of breath came from Kundalini yoga practice that I had for many years, and I still use aspects of that. But for me, I got into Qigong because Kundalini yoga was this like warrior training, and I'm like, oh, I'm a little tired. Like, and I found Qigong, and I was just like, boundaries and just like this subtle experience of myself. And I mean, in the most advanced Qigong is like, can you stand there? and how does it feel to sit with my feet over the balls of or like stand with my weight over the balls of my foot, and all of these just subtle aspects of like lifting through the crown and dropping through the hips, and we have to quiet down in order to have these subtle experiences. And Wim Hof, again, is this, we want to put him in the side of peak experience. And we need to have experience through the whole spectrum. And I want people to understand there's no right or wrong breath, maybe just improper application or knowledge of application. And Wim Hof, it's like, if you're not doing the water therapy, the meditation, there's so many variables to how he got to where he is. We only look at the breath. Okay, well, I just want to do the Wim Hof breath and, and it's like, you guys, like, if that's also kind of dangerous, because what are we doing? We're increasing our sympathetic system. And we need to be careful with doing that as well. If you don't have the polarity of the practice of understanding all the subtle aspects of my breath, mobility, strength, power. And so if I advise people, if you cannot even lengthen your exhale, if you don't have proper core compression, if you can't, actually exhale and pull the belly in, if you don't have a concept of that, you should be very careful with the Wim Hof breath. Or I should even say, I don't want to attach Wim Hof to that type of breathing pattern, a sympathetic breathing pattern, because we also have pranayama yoga or holotropic breath work. All of these things are in the same category. And now I want to go a little bit deeper and think, okay, my breathing pattern is also a reflection of mental patterns. So if I'm always breathing in and out my mouth, I want you to think about the times in your life, and the emotions and experiences to it in when you where you are breathing in and out your mouth, right? Or I'm like laughing really hard, or I'm yelling at somebody. It's all of these peak emotions, right? So when I do that breathing pattern, remember, I am opening up a freaking vortex of like whatever emotion or experience or thing that is attached to that breathing pattern is now being opened up. That's why you see people crying, you see people laughing, you see people experience peak emotion when they go into this breathing pattern, right? And so I think there's something to be said about repeating something every day for, a sustained amount of time to experience a progression within that thing, to explore that practice. Do I think it's something you should do every day for the rest of your life? I mean, no, because I think you need to be careful with how often we are accessing that experience, because there's also emotions and traumas stuck in our subtle experience of breath too. So, what is your purpose for Wim Hof? Are you doing it because it's cool? Are you doing it because, like, what is your true purpose? Are you doing it to actually explore aspects of yourself, to know that you're opening up this space of all those patterns that are attached to the web of this experience, of this breath? And I think people need to now slow. And I say that and I laugh because I just turned 31 on Wednesday, and if you were to like caught 21-year-old Kristina, my whole I needed to slow down, that's for sure. I've learned how to slow down. And even then my friends still call me squirrel. I leave crumbs and I'm kind of a little quick. um, but I want, again, people to be very careful. And I've seen Wim Hof speak, and he's very much like he is a sympathetic man. He's very like loud and kind of like in your face and this and that, and that's a reflection of the breathing pattern that he constantly like achieves, or the state that he's always in. It's a reflection. He's always just kind of go go go, which is beautiful. It's great because look what he can do with his body. But look at the Shaolin monks; they can kind of do the same thing, but it's more subtle, right? So they're achieving the same thing, but just in different ways. And so I want to show people like, hey, if we quiet down, or if we repeat a pattern, I want you to just inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4 for 30 days for 3 minutes a day, and when I first get people to do that pattern, I watch their reaction, because what we're doing is we're going back to time, right? We're changing our sense of time. And so when people go to that, we'll just do this breathing pattern first, is within 3 minutes, I can notice like within a minute, I'm like, okay, yeah, they're bored, and like at first the 3 minutes is like the longest 3 minutes of your life. And remember, people, that there's an entrance fee to all things. And I learned this from my Kundalini teacher. And when she said that, I was like, whoa. Some of the entrance fees are like painful. Some of them are like really easy. You're like, oh. And that entrance fee is dropping into that flow state, into that sense of time, where as you practice something, right? And a practice is different than a workout, right? We're stuck in this whole peak experience of a beginning and an end and a workout. And it's like, I'd rather have a practice that implies learning and repetition and growth and exploration. And so when you repeat something over time, it's amazing how 3 minutes at first seems like the longest 3 minutes of your life. And then all of a sudden 3 minutes all is like, whoa, that was like 2 seconds. You're changing your perception of time, people. And I'll give you an example of changing that perception is when I first started to practice breath, I would watch the clock and I would try to inhale for 10 seconds and then exhale for 10 seconds, right? And I would notice that when I would count faster than our perceived seconds, right? So I'm like trying to get it over with, right? Like, see, look, I can inhale for 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, And so I put down the timer, and I started to just say, okay, what do I perceive a second to be? So I would inhale for 10, exhale for 10. And then one day I was like, you know what? I'm going to put a timer next to me and I'm going to see like what if it's the same, right? My seconds were actually slower than the seconds that my phone perceived. So my perception of seconds and time had expanded and become slower. So I wasn't really breathing in for 10, maybe I was breathing in for 15. But it doesn't matter because it's all relative. You can't tell somebody like, hey, I can breathe in for 20, or can you? And it's like, no, it's like that will change over time. Because what I feel like 20 seconds is now feels different than what 20 seconds was 2 years ago, because it has much easier. And side note too is, if you think about Wim Hof, just to break it down to the four corners, think about what they're doing is they're shortening the space between the inhale and the exhale, so there's no hold. But the fact that we have to say, hey, don't shorten that space, or there is no space between the exhale, and acknowledging that we're shortening that space makes it so. Still makes it's still there. So we are still seeing the four corners of the breath present in this practice. Okay, going just kind of fitting the principle back in there, Does that make sense? All that.
Yeah, totally. No, I love that. Yeah. Well, what I was thinking about, and I think it's really important that you're touching on, is the subtle versus peak experience, as people are looking for the hack in the quick way. And, that's it's a kind of like a disease in society right now, which, for me, in my process, that's all I was ever looking for, is the fast. Now we can be efficient. So I think if we can reframe it to what is an efficient way to get strong? What is an efficient way to become enlightened?
Self-talk.
What is an efficient way to earn money so I can travel and have a joyous experience? You know what I mean? But we're looking for these hacks and these, you're 300 pounds and, how do I, get a six pack overnight? It's like, well, man, you are on for a journey. And anybody who has mastered one thing realizes that mastery is a journey of dedication, of practice. And if you have that goal and you're committed to that goal, you're going to figure it out. And even if you have the most efficient way versus somebody just meandering, the person meandering, if they're just as committed, are probably not too far behind you. It's really the consistency and the process. And so I think that it's important for people to just really take that in as we go about our day, because it's all shorter time, microwave, just like just all these things that make it quicker rather than what the reality is. And the reality is that there's a process. And, again, like training in China with the monks, you've got the training, but what about all those times when you're just walking through the hallway to your room and then back out to training, or how you live your life, and you see them move with this level of mastery and peace so different than the Westerners would move from space to space. You know what I mean? They just always rushing around. You see it in their, even how you look left to right, how they breathe, how they move. They're literally ninjas. And it's amazing. But you can see that and they teach it too. It's not like they hide it. They're like, mastery. This is life. And that's why for me, I loved martial arts, because it wasn't, you go do martial arts or hockey or the Wim Hof breath and then it ends. It's like, this is a model for how you can experience existence and take this everywhere. It's not just here and then not at the dinner table or at your friend's house watching football or whatever the case is. So, what you're speaking about is really, really powerful and super important for people to know, because to touch on the peak experience thing, everyone, even with my coaching with athletes, or if I'm doing like life coaching, or I hate that term, it's like life creation, happiness or whatever. People want like that peak thing, but I was like, there's so much in between. You know what I mean? Whether it's enlightenment, it's everything in between. And that's the space that we want to get to. And you can learn that through breath. You're saying, you can do a breath pattern that activates DMT. That's great. But you don't want to do that every day. You want to actually have the different.
Be right here.
Exactly. So really beautiful and powerful stuff. So I don't know if you had something, because again, your well of knowledge is really deep. One of the things I guess I wanted to touch on is just your best advice for for fitness and applying breath. So I know that you have a really, if you can summarize some core principles of, if you want to have a fit and strong body, maybe it could even just be like go to CrossFit or not CrossFit or whatever. And then how to take breath and bring it into our lives so we can start to explore it with ourselves.
Yeah. So first of all, it's changing the mindset of what a breath practice is. When I started to consciously drink more water and really go, okay, I'm going to drink more water. And then, wow, a month later, it took a month for me to like actually hydrate myself over time. You're like, wow, water. So simple. It's clear liquid. Maybe I put a lemon in it, or maybe, I don't know, but it's a nutrient. And I didn't realize how much energy I didn't have until I consciously drank more water and hydrated myself. And so people need to understand, like, start with the simple. I would say this: inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4. Try that every day for 3 to 5 minutes. Just try it. And for a month, and tell me what happens, and see what happens, because we want to actually breathe less. And that's a whole other misconception too, is we want to have less air per minute than we want, like all this, like trying to inhale more air. We don't want to inhale more air. We want to inhale a small amount. And that comes, you see that in like yogic texts of saying, the breath is silent and it's not even there. It's because it's so efficient. I don't need more. I don't need, there's this like just the right proper breathing volume. So box breath, 4 seconds in, hold, exhale, 4, hold 4. So another thing is, I would say my breath of strength. So I call it cannon breath. So let me like adjust. I'm going to use my belly. So first of all, if I want to be able to see like what my exhale is actually doing, I'm going to exhale. Right. I'm going to exhale and place my hand over my belly, and notice if my belly exhales and I can actually push my abs in, right? And I know that's a really simple concept for some people. You're like, yeah, whatever. But I do that every day. Like, that's me massaging my organs. It's not like, okay, oh yeah, I can do that. Okay, what's next? And I'm like, keep doing it. Keep doing it every day. And so on my YouTube channel, I have an explanation for what I call cannon breath. So it's an exhale, and I hold my exhale out. And it's an art of noticing. Now I'm noticing my current patterns of strength. If I exhale and nothing happens to my belly, or I exhale and then my inhale is up here, that's my current pattern. No wonder you have shoulder issues and neck issues and back issues. What are my current patterns? So and this is not a quick breath. You shouldn't be dizzy. And a lot of breath practices, people are like, oh, I felt tingly, and it's like, I want to expand. I want to feel tingly like later on. I don't like, that's my cap. Like when I start to feel that, that means my breath is starting to get tired and inefficient. I don't want to feel that. When I started doing Kundalini yoga, at first, like, you do all of the movements, and within a minute, I'm like, whoa, like I'm releasing too much CO2. And so over time, after 3 minutes, you're like, oh, that I didn't feel that feeling anymore. So cannon breath. I want you to exhale and squeeze even that muscle, that our P muscle. That's something that we also don't talk about, but we kind of like briefly go over in yoga. They're like, okay, squeeze the pelvic floor. And we have all these cues that people actually have never connected feeling to. So like, okay, yeah, pelvic floor. Okay, yeah, chest up, shoulders back, whatever. And I'm like, do you actually know what that feels like? What does it feel like? And so I have people do the cannon breath, and they just exhale, and I say, hold out the exhale. I want you to squeeze, keep squeezing. And a lot of times people don't realize that when they hold out their exhale, they release their abs. And then they'll try to inhale. I'm like, no. Exhale, hold it, and then slowly inhale through your nose and release your abs at the same time. Then all of a sudden you're drawing the air in, and when they learn to connect those two, all of a sudden you'll watch their breath go deeper and deeper into their torso. And so when I bring my breath deeper into my torso, you know what I'm doing to my spine? I'm stretching out all of the spaces around my spine. I'm creating room for my nervous system, right? And so if I do that every day, I'm massaging my spine with my breath. My spine is the connection between my two brains. We have two brains, by the way. This brain And this brain is the brain of feeling, of like, oh, I got butterflies in my stomach, or oh, that made me sick to my stomach, or oh, this brain is what's reacting to the things, and our conscious mind is what's going like, hey, oh wow, that song was playing, this person was here, like all of these things are connected to this state of being, and that's what we hold in trauma, right? But it's a simple act of saying, hey, is my inhale natural? Can I bring breath to this area? Because that is the foundation of my strength, right? Is just being able to breathe into that space below the belly button with ease. And so this is where I drop in the box breath, and I call it the magnifying glass of exploration. So box breath, magnifying glass of exploration. Because and this is why I'm telling people to just do this simply, because then if I have the box breath, right, now I can direct it into the 3 chambers. I can inhale for 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4, just into this space. Well, then I can also do that to that space above my belly button. I inhale, hold 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4. Now I can go that space below my belly button. Inhale, hold 2, 3, 4, hold 2, right? Oh, wait, hold on. I can add it to movement too. It's like but most people try to learn the movement and the pattern all at the same freaking time. It's like, you guys, take the subtle layers, be really comfortable with these forms of nutrient, and then you can apply them. So like I was mentioning, I went surfing and I went mountain bike riding this past week. I mean, I haven't been mountain bike riding in like forever, and like my brain's just like, oh my God, this is so much fun. I love the process of learning. But ultimately, when we explore breath, we are teaching ourselves how to learn. Because if we have the mindset of exploration, we're not thinking to ourselves what I can or can't do. We're just noticing what we're currently able to do and going, oh, well, if I keep repeating this thing, my body will tell me what is appropriate and how to change. Because all of the things that I'm teaching you and I learned were just based off me exploring. When I first started to create primal coding, I purposely didn't research other methods because I wanted to create my own pathway myself. And now as I explore other methods, I'm like, okay, cool, they're kind of doing the same thing. Right? So using the box breath on its own, getting so comfortable with it that you can access flow state with it, right? You can access things, and now it's just the tool. And people need to realize, like with a breath practice, when things get easy, awesome, now you've carved out the tool, now use it. Don't go to it's not about going to the next thing. It's like, you've used it, now use it again and again and again. So when my clients are, angry, or because ultimately to change behavior is physiology. So if I know how to use my breath to decrease my heart rate, so I'm so angry, you know what? I have this lens of anger and I want to like be angry at you. Well, you're like, oh, well, my heart rate just increased, my blood pressure increased. Like, oh, I know how to decrease those. Now I'm going to do my box breath or just lengthen my exhale to decrease my heart rate. And now I can approach and see through a lens of safety. Now I'm calm. Like, okay, now I can approach the situation. It's like now we're leading into not only physical practice, now we're leading into behavior change through breath. And that's the thing. We just did one pattern, and now we just went through all of those physical and mental. It's like there's so much wrapped into one, just a couple different patterns. On my YouTube channel, I have the box that content or that I developed, but you'll see cannon breath, you'll see core activation, you'll see ratio breathing. And I recently just filmed a bunch of videos that is a better map to all these things that I'll be coming out with, hopefully developing like a 28-day program for people just to kind of test it out and do all the things. And yeah.
Love it. No, it's so good. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Even with teaching meditation, they'll talk about the breath, but it's so surface, it's, you say, okay, pay attention to your breath. But when you go into it, you could literally explore it your entire life as a tool because you're bringing mindfulness into your body and exploring the body. And one of the things that I like that you just said there was you did it your own way. You didn't read books. And I think like we're so
I like some
conditioned
books. I
to
need
look at
some.
a book. But you read the books, you do it, but you honor your own process in learning. So use books as guide. I read a lot, but also I also value me looking at it and figuring out for me what works in my own way and exploring. Like Wim Hof was the same thing. He just put his butt in cold, and that was the breath pattern that ended up coming out. And the other thing I like to say about like the Wim Hof, I love the Wim too. I think he's just such a great character, and he's doing amazing things and he's showing what's possible. And also there's a guy on YouTube that drinks vodka and swims in ice, and I forget his name. He always comes up on Reddit, but it's so funny. He just
Really?
drinks vodka and he skates and he just jumps in cold water and he's totally fine. Now, I think you might just
To
have
each his
like, I don't know
own.
if he's Russian or European, but like,
Yeah, the rest is
you
kind
can
of
do it.
like nowhere to what's up. The
Yeah,
rest is no
yeah,
what's
right. So
up.
but that guy, you can just do it, right? If you just go out into the cold and you test yourself, you're going to figure out your own way to do it. And then you can come back with the way that was right for you. And that's why, kind of like
Get
martial arts,
checked.
my big influence being Bruce Lee is that he's like, okay, cool. I'm going to do it my way, but I'm going to take elements of boxing, of kickboxing, of jujitsu, and then I'll make it and I'll take what works for me. But I'm also going to explore it in my own way and test it in my own way. So I think that's a really important caveat for people to just learn to explore it, and just to think for yourself, because it's not just one way. It's not just the Wim Hof way,
No.
because it might not be right for you. It might actually hurt, and if it does hurt or something bad, same with
What are
yoga.
my other
I have a
options?
guy, have a lot of friends. Well, not a lot of friends, but there's a yoga teacher here, and he would say a lot of people, I'm fixing current yoga um, injuries, and I was like, oh, that happens because I've done yoga, but I've never done it
Hmm.
super intensely for a long time, and usually I'm reasonably flexible through my other practices, but a lot of people can get hurt, so maybe rather than yoga
Oh
you
yeah.
want to do mountain biking, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, really important just to think for yourself and make your own way. So you know
Yeah.
you want to add something?
No, yeah, I was
Look
just
like you
gonna
want to add
say
something.
that, no, yeah, just reference points. I think people need to understand, like, all of those things are reference points for change, And it's like, if we don't have a reference point of like what it feels like, and then going back to that one thing, we can't register change, because people need to understand that this type of practice, yeah, because I'm a trained eye, I can see all your things. But you don't have a trained eye, so you need to trust yourself, trust your exploration, and just like the way that your body wants to guide you. Trust that it's not about right or wrong, it's about a spectrum of experience. And having reference points are huge, and that's what I want to guide people to. It's like, hey, try this breath, this is a reference point. So like, I know when I wake up in the morning, sometimes I can breathe in for 20, my first breath, exhale 20. But then some days I can barely breathe in for 5 and exhale for 5. But if I didn't have that reference point of practice of actually expanding, I couldn't have a conversation with my nervous system. So on the days that I can only breathe in or 5 or 10, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm stressed. All these things are happening. And so when we have these reference points, we can again have that conversation with ourselves and understand the state of our nervous system, and not be like, God, why is this happening? Or why do I feel like this? Or why does that? What blah blah blah. Because I'll ask my clients, like, so you get out of breath. What's the trigger? They're like, I don't know. There's no trigger. I'm like, okay, sure. I'm like, you just all of a sudden you're out of breath, or you get stressed. And then when I start to say this, the fog clears, and they're like, oh, so when this happens, that's what happens. It's like, we need to just slow down and realize, like, there are triggers to all of these things, and what are my reference points to understanding where my nervous system's at. Again, this is a nutrient, people, not a workout. It's water.
Amazing.
Like
Yeah.
water.
Man, yeah, so much really amazing insight, even in that little last rant there. You shared so much, in-depth information, super beautiful. But again, what I really like is that it's grounded in a process and a practice of self-exploration. It's not, here is this pill, then you're done, 5 deadlifts or whatever. But I wanted to ask, before we kind of close a little bit, and this is a soft close because I want to open this up, so feel free to elaborate as long as you want.
Yeah.
But if you're going to offer something to new to breath or new to fitness, or even like for and this could be a separate question, 2 of them, I have 2 athletes going to the Olympics. So what would you offer from what you've learned for achieving peak for performance, and then a high state of physical health, because it's very different, right? Whether you're doing CrossFit or you're doing snowboarding, they're a little bit different. But what do you have as far as core fundamentals or principles that somebody can apply to achieve peak performance?
I think unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, it really depends on the person, right? And the type of person they are. So, I think the first, like, most fundamental thing is, are you a mouth breather or are you a nose breather? Because you can, do you snore? Do you breathe out your mouth when you're sleeping at night? Because that plays a huge role in your body oxygenation level. And if you want to know more about this, I'd research the Buteyko method if you're nerdy and super interested in that. Because I can do all the breathing patterns. I can train all that I want. But if I go to bed at night and I'm just like and like have this large breathing volume, I'm kind of reversing most of the things that I just did during the day. Although I can drink all the water, I can have all the good nutrients, but remember, we have food, we have water, and we have movement and breath as a nutrient, right? And when I go into a sport dehydrated or not properly eating, and I didn't eat properly, right? That's going to make my performance not as not as quality as I know, or like not have the most potential, right? I know that if I'm hydrated and I eat right, like I'm going to perform peak, my peak performance. And then you talked about these fighters that you would go against, and they couldn't even really breathe into these subtle patterns. And you were kind of surprised that they couldn't do these things. And so a lot of the people who are at this elite level think, well, I'm already at this level, so why would I need to learn that? And I'm like, dude, you're at this level and you don't know that? I'm like, think about the level you could be at. I'm like, what? Like, you could be so much better. But for them, they're already at the top of peak performance. I'm like, you guys, let's break through the ceiling here, And so the simple act of small breathing patterns, I think people just need to, like, make sure that, they're not mouth breathers. Number one, I know that seems like so simple, but like, I know, like, one of the coaches that I've, a good friend of mine, he put some tape on his, he used to own a CrossFit. And so, like, he put tape over their mouths and have them do the whole workout with just breathing through their nose. And so, like, little subtle patterns like that, like, what is my capacity to work breathing in and out my nose? And then another friend of mine, he is working with, like, XPT, you're familiar, like Larry Hamilton stuff, my friend PJ. He actually was in the lab and noticing that he said, okay, I want you to work to the capacity where you can only breathe through your nose, and then let me, in the second that you break and you have to breathe out your mouth. Then he measured their heart rate, and it just so happened to be related to or correlated to their lactate threshold. So it's like, so now we're going to now we're getting to something, like I said, so many layers to this. But as an athlete, I think if you can do all of the, like, core activation, breath, and all these things all you want, but if I'm not properly oxygenated, the efficiency of my action is not going to fully be there, and then I'm missing out on a lot of potential, right, in my performance. And so I think before my workout, it depends on the person, right? If they're going through their day and they spend their day teaching and talking and always breathing out their mouth, why do you think when you lecture or do something and talk all day, you're so tired at the end of the day? You just release so much CO2. So maybe you spend 10 minutes doing small breaths and just breathing through your nose. I know it's so simple, but, like, what is a nose breath reflection in, what is that, the emotional pattern that's reflected in a nose breath? Just like calm, right? I'm calm. I want to remain calm. And so I think that subtle layer is helpful. As an athlete, just making sure that my exhale is connected to its purpose, so that core activation or the cannon breath, and doing that every day. So I'm massaging my organs. I'm recovering, and that's a recovery breath, right? So how am I recovering from my workout? And like, what else? I don't know. I think that answers some of the question, right?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I love how it all
So,
came back to absolutely breath because yeah, again, from my experience in martial arts, breath is everything, and it seems, ridiculous, and people are like, oh, can you go that deep? But yeah, you can go infinitely deep with the breath
yeah.
once you start exploring it. And I think culturally, if we start to explore that and it becomes popularized in some way,
Mhm.
we're gonna have huge shifts in just consciousness and how people treat each other and how they become aware of their own limits and everything. So. Wonderful
Oh,
answer.
thank
Um,
you. And yeah,
Go ahead.
no, I was gonna tell people too. It's like we're just talking about breath, but I want you to keep in mind we can spend a whole other hour, which we won't, going how the breath just prepared my spine for movement. We didn't even get into spine segmentation and movement of the spine and how beneficial that is. So just remember, people, like we're just talking about the layer of breath, but my breath is preparing my spine. That's preparing my limbs. This is the deepest foundational thing to earning the right to use my limbs. And most people haven't earned that right. They don't know how. So keep in mind, like this is just the foundational thing to again really accessing this antenna that we have, and being and giving it space to move and breathe, because we're very stuck in a world of neutral spine and holding it into place. But remember, mobility is usable range of motion. The ability for my spine to be here also relies on my spine's ability to move into all the directions, and that gets into like maybe like Ido Portal type stuff, and qigong, spinal qigong, and those subtle aspects of movement too. So spine health is mind health, people.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we'll have to go into that in depth
It's a
in
whole other
round
thing.
two. It'll be super
Yeah.
fun and education for me too. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your work and seeing you
Yeah,
at the
thank you for
eclipse
having
and
me.
giving a beautiful gift to the community there. I know that everybody loved it, including myself.
Thank
Um,
you.
so where can people find more about you and just anything that you want to leave the listeners with before we jump off?
Yeah, I mean, primal coding. If you type in primal coding on Google, it's kind of surprisingly the only thing that pops up. I mean, of all the primal things, primal eating and primal blueprint, all the things, primal coding, just type it in and you'll find kind of some of my older YouTube videos. There's another YouTube channel that I had. 'Cause we all had something before the thing, right? But if you go to the primal coding YouTube channel, there are some basic things. I just filmed like 20 different videos, with a progression to all these things that I'm going to be creating some content for, but I'll be putting some stuff on my YouTube channel. I'm on Instagram. I have the same thing as a website. I'm working on a few blog posts. And so, I mean, and being part of your podcast is definitely motivating to get more content out there. Like I said, I am kind of a lone wolf, and I kind of like to entertain myself. And I'm like, I went through this whole practice and I totally forgot to record myself doing it. I'm like, so I'm still working on the giving the content out to people. But if you're looking to work with me, I do Skype sessions as well. So if you're looking to if you have questions or want me to assess your breathing pattern, I can definitely do like just a little 30-minute intro session. My information is here, and I want to freely give it. And I'm looking forward to teaching the teachers, more importantly. And then I actually leave for Spain next Wednesday. I'm going to be doing some research at the University of Cadiz in rock climbing. So I'm going to be, you guys will see my adventures there on Instagram. I'm going to be at the university working on the physiology of the forearm, but also applying all of these breath practices to improving my performance in rock climbing. So I'll be sharing that journey with you guys. And yeah, so a lot of things happening. But
Amazing.
you can find me
Amazing.
if you really want.
Beautiful. I love it. Yeah, well, I'm
Yeah,
excited to see that too. Rock climbing is a whole thing in itself.
yeah,
That's yeah, there's a
love it.
lot of elements to that one. Cool.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. It was wonderful. I'm gonna look at I looked at some of your YouTube videos before, but I'm gonna start because I've been experimenting with breath myself for a long time, different patterns. But I really like the way you teach, and I really like your philosophy around it. So I'll be
Thank
excited to
you.
explore what you have to put out. So
Cool.
thank you
Yeah,
so
and if
much
you
for
have
coming
questions,
on.
please I'll answer them. So
Awesome. Love it. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate you coming
yeah,
on, and thank you everybody for listening. Check you in the next episode.
Bye.
Peace.